Hello. So where are we headed with nuclear energy? I'm going to talk about that, and at the end give a summary of my personal experience and conclusions in making this 5-part series on nuclear energy. In earlier videos on this series, Saving the World Through Nuclear Energy, I argued that we need to rapidly shift away from greenhouse gas emissions for the sake of the climate, which I don't think is controversial, and that we can't do that affordably and reliably without incorporating nuclear into the strategy. We also looked at the issues that led to the decline of new nuclear plant construction since the 1980s. Highly public and scary nuclear accidents certainly led to a change in public attitudes, and the reactors in which these occurred are relics of an earlier era. These are not the future of nuclear energy, but still, the most important factor in the decline in construction was increased cost, the risks of which, due to the deregulation of electricity markets, shifted largely to multinational corporations. These, by their nature, are averse to the financial risks inherent in uncertain energy markets competing with cheap fossil fuels. Today, let's have a look at nuclear technologies and what's in store in the coming years. This graphic illustrates the development of nuclear reactor designs since the 1950s. First-generation designs were early prototypes, and few or none are still in operation. The last ones in Europe were closed in 2010. I reviewed the operation of second-generation nuclear reactors in this video. Built up to the end of the 1990s, second-generation nuclear reactors are light water reactors. These use enriched uranium as a nuclear fuel and water as a moderator, meaning neutrons are slowed by the water, which makes them more likely to be absorbed and to split uranium nuclei. The water is also used for cooling and boiling. Steam is generated from the heat of fission, driving turbines which spin a generator producing electricity. Most current reactors are of this type. Standard features of them are a surrounding reactor vessel, instruments to control and monitor the reactor, radiation shielding, and a containment building. But what Generation 2 reactors do not have are passive safety features. These are safety measures that only rely on natural forces, like gravity or gas pressure, to function, without needing electrical power or active human involvement for monitoring. Generation 3 reactors are somewhat a matter of nomenclature and classification. The European pressurized water reactor is one example. It uses much Generation 2 methodology with advanced safety features. A double thick concrete wall contains radioactive materials in case of an accidental meltdown. A new system avoids the explosive risk of hydrogen accumulation. Protection against earthquakes is improved. It has 4 independent emergency cooling systems, each one of which is capable of cooling the reactor for 1 to 3 years following an initial shutdown of the reactor. There are several designs, and some are in use, 2 in Japan since 1996, and several others under construction. The cost is high, however, and delay and cost overruns have been the rule. But another of the most promising technologies may be just about ready for commercial implementation. That's the Small Modular Light Water Reactor, or SMR. This term, Small Modular Reactor, describes small but scalable light water reactors. And in terms of their technology, they vary from Generation 3 to Generation 4. But in general, you might use one of these modules to power a desalination plant, for example, to produce fresh water. Or maybe a number of them put together as a unit to power a city, depending on its size. There are SMR designs coming out of multiple countries, including China, Russia, Argentina, and South Korea. A U.S. company called NuScale has designed the first SMR to pass the hardest hurdle to approval in the United States, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's Phase 1 review, which it passed in 2018. With the NRC announcing its conclusion that NuScale's novel safety design does not require any safety-related electrical power. The NuScale design has passive safety provisions. In other words, minimal to no electrical power is required for safety systems or to provide long-term cooling in the case of an accident. This kind of reactor can shut itself down and maintain cooling long-term in case of catastrophe. They use a fraction of the fuel per plant compared to Generation 2 reactors, further reducing risk. There are no coolant pumps that might fail, relying instead on natural circulation for cooling, requiring no backup power in the case of an accident, and modules are housed in a large underground pool absorbing potential shocks from earthquakes. They are relatively small in size, which allows factory standardized production, reducing costs considerably, allowing flexibility in site location, delivery of modules by truck, and more modules can be added if more power is needed. Custom individual plant design and construction is no longer necessary. A conventional nuclear plant costs about $7 billion and produces around a gigawatt of electrical power. Each smaller NuScale module produces about 50 megawatts of power, and an envisioned package of 12 would produce 600 megawatts of power and cost about $3 billion. A 12 module unit would occupy around a square mile, compared to 200 square miles for a wind farm capable of producing the same amount of electricity. It's a considerable and exciting advance. Let's focus now on a few Generation 4 designs. In other words, designs that are likely to be ready for implementation before 2030 without an accelerated development and deployment program. The sodium fast reactor is promising. This design calls for radioactive products of fission to be consumed and in some cases used as fuel, eliminating or vastly reducing the production of nuclear waste. The fuel in the reactor expands when the reactor overheats, which causes the chain reaction to automatically slow down or stop as components in the reactor core are no longer close enough to sustain the fission reaction. In this manner, it's passively safe. The sodium fast reactor is cooled by liquid sodium and fueled by a metallic alloy of uranium and plutonium, or spent nuclear fuel, nuclear waste. So any waste is used in the functioning of the system. And the liquid sodium heats very slowly, so it's safer than water as a coolant. There are challenges still to be overcome, including the risks of sodium, which can be explosive if coming in contact with water. However, the use of liquid metal instead of water as a coolant is an option. Overall, this is a safer design that reduces or eliminates the issue of nuclear waste. And then there's a design called a modular, very high temperature gas-cooled reactor. This offers two advantages over modern Generation 3 reactor designs. The high temperature of the coolant exiting the reactor means much higher thermal efficiency than electrical generation in traditional plants, meaning more of the fuel is consumed and the energy output from a given amount of fuel is greater, and in addition can serve to facilitate hydrogen production, which is used in emerging fuel cell technology, which will be very important in a future low-carbon world, which is beyond the scope of this conversation. The coolant is helium, which does not absorb neutrons. So even in the event of an accident, would not become radioactive. And graphite, as a moderator, allows higher temperatures and more efficient fission. The promise of this technology is that it would be free of radioactive emissions potential. And the high heat capacity of graphite minimizes risks of meltdown at high temperatures. There are at least 5 other promising technologies that will not be ready by 2030 without an accelerated development program. And I'm just going to mention one of these. Thorium is an alternative fuel for nuclear reactors. It's far more abundant on Earth than is uranium. And all of it is usable as a fuel, so it doesn't require enrichment as does uranium. It's less hazardous to mine with far less potential to produce hazardous waste products. So it potentially supplies fuel for energy needs far into the future. Waste is perhaps 1/100th of that produced in traditional reactors. And whatever waste is produced is hazardous for maybe a few hundreds of years rather than thousands of years. Like other Generation 4 designs, a thorium reactor can incorporate a plug at the bottom of a reactor which melts in the event of a power failure or if temperatures exceed a set amount, draining the fuel into a containment where fission will not occur. While issues for large-scale use have not been completely ironed out, the technology has been proven effective. In the 1960s, the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee conducted what is called the molten salt reactor experiment, which used thorium as a fuel. I won't detail molten salt reactors, but this experiment successfully operated a thorium reactor from 1965 to 1969. It lost out in competition for federal funding, but proof of concept was established. The bottom line about thorium? Nuclear energy could potentially proceed with an abundant, safer fuel than the enriched uranium that is being used in reactors today. What happened to me in researching and making this series of videos? Well, for one thing, I was banned from a particular subreddit, not having realized that they had a rule stating no pretending that nuclear energy can make even a temporary contribution to the world's energy problems. I'm guilty of unknowingly violating this rule. But therein lies one of the biggest obstacles to a solution. On the one hand, even people who recognize the global urgency of the issue may have biases that make it extremely difficult to arrive at a socially and politically agreeable solution, even if the technology needed is ready at hand. And on the other hand, many people don't believe in that urgency, or if they do, they're willing to wait for a better technological solution. For me, through this research, I've come to believe that nuclear represents far more energy than we'll need for the foreseeable future. But we need it to be safe and economical. I would like to see an Apollo or Manhattan Project style commitment to the research and development of safe new nuclear, and I'd like to see it now. Hyper-concise executive summary? We need to rapidly decarbonize our energy sources. In the long term, renewables with better storage technologies or an alternative technology altogether may be the solution. In the meantime, a nuclear component with new emerging safer and lower cost design can help us bridge the gap between our desperate need today to prevent the looming catastrophe of global warming and climate change and our eventual transition to the sunlit uplands of long-term safe and abundant energy for humankind. Be sure to subscribe, hit the notification button, and thanks a lot for watching.